a young mother, a 2-year-old child, both brutally stabbed to death, in their own home. A place that should have been safe, filled with warmth and laughter. But on that night, it became a scene of pure horror. The man responsible? He wasn't some stranger lurking in the dark. No, he was someone they trusted. Someone they knew. Someone who was supposed to protect them. But instead, he became their worst nightmare. It happened in West Haven, Connecticut. A quiet apartment complex. Neighbors living their normal lives, unaware that just behind one door, a mother and child were fighting for their last breath. And when the police arrived, the man who did it didn't run through the door. He didn't try to sneak away. No, he jumped. Out of a second-story window. What was he running from? The police? His guilt? Or the horror of what he had just done? This wasn't a random act of violence. This wasn't a simple crime of passion. There was something deeper here, something darker. What led to this moment? What happened in that apartment before the screams echoed through the night? And why did a mother and her child have to die? The truth behind this crime is more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. But before we get into that, we need to talk about who they were. Because before they became victims, they were a family. Before the headlines, before the crime scene tape, before the police lights filled the night, they were just a mother and her child. Hailey Miller, 19 years old. A girl with dreams bigger than the small town she grew up in. She wanted to be a nurse, to help people, to make a difference. She had this way of making everyone feel safe, like no matter how bad things got, she would be there with a smile, telling you everything was going to be okay. But the person she cared about most? Her baby boy. Just 2 years old. Too young to understand the world, too young to know fear, too young to know that sometimes, the people who are supposed to love you the most can be the ones who hurt you the worst. He was just a baby. Full of life, full of laughter. He loved running around the house, his tiny feet tapping against the floor, his giggles filling the air. He had this thing where he would hold onto Hailey's finger, like he never wanted to let go. She was his world. And he was hers. Hailey wasn't just a good mom. She was a great mom. She worked hard, always trying to build a better future for her son. Late nights studying, early mornings making sure he had everything he needed. Even when she was exhausted, she'd still sing him to sleep, still hold him close, still whisper, "I love you," in his tiny ears. She didn't have much, but what she had, she gave to him. She had plans. She was going to finish school, get a real career, give Tanaj the life he deserved. She was trying to break free from a cycle so many young mothers get trapped in. But dreams don't always get the chance to come true. Because someone took it all away. Her future. Gone. His future. Gone. And the man who did it? He wasn't a stranger. He wasn't some faceless monster lurking in the shadows. He was someone who once held her. Someone who once told her he loved her. Someone who was supposed to protect her. But instead, he was the reason Hailey never got to tuck her son into bed again. The reason Tanaj never got to grow up. The reason their home became their grave. But what happened that night? What led to that moment when everything changed? The answers are even more terrifying than you think. On the outside he looked like an ordinary man. But behind closed doors, there was something much darker. He and Hailey had history. Some people said they were a couple. Others said their relationship was complicated. Maybe it started with love, maybe it started with promises. But somewhere along the way, it turned into something else. Something toxic. At first things seemed fine. Jevon could be charming when he wanted to be. He had a way with words, a way of making you feel like he was the only one who understood you. Maybe that's what drew Hailey in. Maybe she thought she saw something good in him. But the thing about people like Jevon? The mask doesn't stay on forever. There were fights. Arguments that started small but never seemed to end. Some of Hailey's friends noticed the way she would go quiet when his name came up. The way she seemed tense, like she was always waiting for something bad to happen. Then there were the messages. The calls at odd hours. The way he always seemed to be watching, always wanting to know where she was, who she was with. It wasn't love. It was control. And then, there were the rumors. Some people say this wasn't the first time Jevon got violent. That there were other women before Hailey. Other nights filled with shouting, with slammed doors, with bruises that no one wanted to talk about. Police records show he had run-ins with the law. Nothing that screamed murderer, not at first. But little things. Red flags that no one paid attention to. Until it was too late. Because whatever was building inside Jevon, whatever anger, whatever darkness, finally exploded. And that night, Hailey and Tanaj were caught in the middle of it. But why? What set him off? What pushed him to take a knife and end 2 innocent lives? The truth about that night is even more horrifying than anyone imagined. It was just another quiet night in West Haven. People settling in, finishing dinner, watching TV. Kids getting ready for bed. Just an ordinary evening. And then, the screams. 8:50 p.m. 911 dispatchers started getting calls. One after another. Neighbors frantic, panicked. Saying they heard a woman crying out for help. Saying they heard a child screaming. Saying something terrible was happening inside that apartment on Malloy Road. The police rushed to the scene. Lights flashing. Sirens cutting through the night. No one knew what they were about to walk into. Then they got to the door. Silence. That kind of silence that doesn't feel right. That kind of silence that makes your skin crawl. The officers forced their way in. And that's when they saw it. Hailey. Lying on the floor. Blood pooling around her. So much blood. Her body still lifeless. Stab wounds everywhere. As if whoever did this wasn't just trying to kill her, they wanted to destroy her. And then, the child. Tanaj. 2 years old. A baby. His tiny body crumpled beside his mother's. He didn't stand a chance. His life was taken before he even got to understand what life was. The room was a nightmare. Furniture knocked over. Blood on the walls. Signs of a struggle. Hailey had fought. She had tried to protect herself. Tried to protect her baby. But she lost. And the man who did this? He was nowhere to be found. Then one of the officers heard a noise. A loud thud outside. They ran to the window. And there he was. Jevon. Lying on the ground. Gasping for air. He had jumped from the second story trying to escape. But he didn't get far. He was hurt but still alive. And now he was surrounded by officers. There was nowhere left to run. They grabbed him. Put him in cuffs. Dragged him away from the crime scene he created. And as they pulled him up, he wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming. He just stared. Like he knew exactly what he had done. But the question is, why? What happened in the moments before the blood spilled? What pushed him to the point of no return? The truth is more disturbing than anyone expected. The crime was brutal. But now, the real work began. The investigation. The search for answers. Because no one just wakes up one day and decides to slaughter a mother and her child. Something led to this. Something dark. Something buried beneath the surface. And it started with the autopsies. The medical examiner's report was chilling. Hailey Miller, 19 years old. Full of life, full of dreams. But when they examined her body, they found the truth about her final moments. She had been stabbed more than a dozen times. Wounds deep, violent. Her hands showed signs of a struggle. Cuts along her fingers, bruises on her wrists. She had fought. Hard. She didn't go down without a fight. But the fatal wound was to her chest. A blade driven straight into her, piercing her heart. One blow. That's all it took to end her life. And then, there was Tanaj. 2 years old. Barely old enough to talk. Barely old enough to understand what was happening. He had multiple stab wounds, but only one mattered. A single deep wound to his tiny body. A baby. Murdered. The sheer brutality of it left even the most hardened investigators shaken. This wasn't just a crime of passion. This was rage. Pure, uncontrollable rage. But the question still hung in the air, why? Police started piecing together the final hours before the murders. Talking to friends, neighbors, family. Trying to understand what could have set Jevon off. And one theory kept coming up. Hailey wanted out. People close to her said she had been pulling away. Trying to start fresh. Trying to cut ties with Jevon for good. Maybe she finally told him it was over. Maybe she told him to stay away. Maybe that night he showed up, and she refused to let him in. And maybe, that was all it took. Because men like Jevon, they don't handle rejection well. They don't just walk away. They make sure that if they can't have you, no one can. The interrogation room was silent when police sat across from him. Jevon Tyrese Fletcher. 26 years old. Blood still on his clothes. Hands shaking, face blank. He had jumped out of that window to escape. But now, there was nowhere left to run. The officers asked him one simple question. Why? And what he said next left them speechless. The crime was over. The blood had dried. The bodies had been taken away. But the pain, that never left. For Hailey's family. For her friends. For the people who loved her. The people who watched her grow up, who saw the way she adored her son. The people who now had to wake up every single day knowing she was gone. Knowing Tanaj was gone. And the man responsible? He sat in a cold jail cell waiting for what came next. Jevon Tyrese Fletcher. They threw everything at him. Because this wasn't just murder. This was something worse. Something unforgivable. The judge set his bond at $3 million. $3 million. An amount that meant one thing: he wasn't getting out. Not now. Maybe not ever. Because the people wanted justice. Not just Hailey's family. Not just her friends. But the whole community. This wasn't just another crime. It was a wake-up call. A reminder that violence like this, it doesn't happen in some distant place. It happens here. In quiet neighborhoods. In homes where people are supposed to feel safe. Outside the courthouse, people gathered. Holding candles. Holding pictures of Hailey and Tanaj. Holding on to the memory of two lives that should still be here. They wanted answers. They wanted justice. And on March 13, 2025, the world would be watching. Because that's when Jevon would stand before the court. That's when the charges would be read. That's when the case would truly begin. Would he plead guilty? Would he try to fight it? Would he show even a single ounce of remorse? No one knew. But one thing was certain. The truth about that night, the real truth, had yet to be revealed. This case, it wasn't just about one man's rage. It wasn't just about one mother and her child. It was about something bigger. Something deeper. Something that happens every single day, behind closed doors. Domestic violence. It's a phrase people hear all the time. But what does it really mean? What does it really look like? Looks like Hailey. A young mother with her whole life ahead of her. Trapped in a cycle she couldn't escape. It looks like the warning signs people ignored. The control. The threats. The fear in her voice when she talked about him. It looks like the millions of women, mothers, daughters, sisters, who go through the same thing. Who try to leave. Who try to move on. And who don't make it out alive. Because the truth is, Hailey's story isn't rare. It's not shocking. It happens every single day. A woman is killed by an intimate partner every 6 hours in the United States. Every 6 hours. And the worst part? So many of them saw it coming. So many of them knew they were in danger. But they had nowhere to go. No one to turn to. Because leaving isn't as easy as people think. It's dangerous. It's terrifying. And for some women, it's a death sentence. That's why people fight. That's why people speak out. That's why organizations work day and night to help victims escape before it's too late. Because Hailey and Tanaj should still be here. That's why her family launched a GoFundMe, to cover funeral expenses, to lay them to rest the way they deserve. To make sure people remember them. And that's why law enforcement is looking at cases like this differently. Because domestic violence isn't just yelling. It's not just arguments. It's a pattern. A slow-burning fuse leading to an explosion. Police are trained to recognize it now. To step in before another life is lost. To take every call, every warning sign seriously. But the question is it enough? Because there's one more part of this story. One more chapter. And it changes everything. Hailey Miller was 19 years old. She had dreams. She had a future. She had a little boy who was her whole world. Tanaj Fletcher was just 2. He had barely begun to live. He had just learned how to say mama. He had just started to run, to laugh, to reach for her hand when he was scared. And now, they're both gone. Because one man decided that if he couldn't have them, no one could. Because the warning signs weren't enough. Because no one stopped him before it was too late. This wasn't just a murder. It was a failure. A failure to protect a young mother who knew she was in danger. A failure to save a little boy who never even had a chance. And the hardest question of all is the one we'll never have the answer to. What if someone had stepped in? What if someone had called the police sooner? What if Jevon had been stopped before that night? Would Hailey still be here? Would Tanaj still be laughing? Would they both still be alive? We'll never know. But what we do know is that this doesn't have to happen again. Because right now, somewhere, a woman is scared. She's watching this. She's seeing herself in Hailey. She's thinking about leaving, but she doesn't know how. If that's you, if you feel trapped, if you feel like no one will believe you, if you're waiting for the right moment to leave, this is your sign, There are people who will listen. There are people who will help. If you or someone you know is in danger, call for help. You are not alone. Hailey and Tanaj's story has ended. But for someone out there, it's not too late.